Well, a lot of words today. Sorry about that. A lot of words today. Hey, my name is Ryan, in case you missed that, and I'm the lead pastor here at Crossroads. It's great to be together. And we're in a series called Feast of Gratitude. Inside your program are some talk notes. If you're a fill-in-the-blank kind of person, you can pull those out. It'll give you hope that it will end at some point in time. We gather with all of our volunteers around 9:30 in the morning, and we just kind of come, we hear good news from everybody, and we pray over the day, all that good stuff. And we were doing 5 pieces of good news today, and one of our volunteers said, hey, my good news is that the Broncos can't lose today, which means my good news is nobody's in a rush to leave. So no, it's good. It's great to be together. Our anchor verse for this series is found in 1 Thessalonians 5:18. 1 Thessalonians, by the way, little piece of Bible trivia for you, is our earliest letter in the New Testament, authentic Paul letter, probably the earliest piece of Christian literature that we have in the Scripture, 1 Thessalonians. 1 Thessalonians 5:18 says, in all circumstances, give thanks, for this is the will of God for you in Christ Jesus. Notice it doesn't say for all circumstances. It says in all circumstances, give thanks. Anybody in the room watching Ted Lasso? You've watched Ted Lasso? Raise your hand up nice and high if you watch Ted Lasso. I love Ted Lasso. I'm just going to throw that out there. You can judge me if you want. I don't really care. But I think it's a fantastic show. If you're not familiar with it, very quickly, Ted Lasso, the premise is there's an American football coach who gets hired by an English football team, a professional team. And the idea is that he's supposed to come, and basically the owner wants to ruin the team. He doesn't know anything about, we call it soccer. Doesn't know anything about it, right? But he comes and he's a great coach. And just the characters in this show are wonderful, and the storyline is just fantastic. Well, the second season opens up with Ted's team, the Greyhounds. They have been relegated to a lower league. And they're finishing up a game. They've had like 6 ties, no wins, no losses. And Danny Rojas, one of the key players, is getting ready to kick a penalty kick. And it's all in slow motion, and the music is playing, and he's eyeing it up. And he's in this background in his head, he would say, football is life, right? And he's so excited about it. And then he rears back in. As he's getting ready to kick, you see a bird that starts to fly. And all of a sudden, you see out of the corner, the mascot, right? The mascot, Earl, a greyhound dog, gets loose from the handler and sees that bird. And so Earl starts to chase the bird. Danny kicks the ball, as you can only imagine a professional football player being able to kick it. And Earl, at just the right moment, reaches up to try and get the bird, misses the bird, but then is killed by the soccer ball. Sorry, I'm a dog person. I apologize. But And then Danny's just like mortified. And so at the end of it, they ended another tie, and it's like the press conference afterwards, the press conference. So Ted's sitting at his table, the press are there, and one of the people asked about the incident. One of the reporters says, would you like to make a comment on Earl and how Danny's doing? And Ted starts to tell this story. And he tells this story of how when he was 3 years old, he got bit by a dog. And that traumatized him. And he didn't remember it, but he just knew that it had happened, and he was very terrified of dogs. Like if he would go and spend the night at a friend's house, then they had a family dog, they'd have to put the family dog out because it would just terrify him. And as he got older and older, he was in high school, they had a neighbor named Mr. Grady. And Mr. Grady's wife died when he was in high school. And Mr. Grady became really sad and stopped taking care of his dog, Hank. And so Ted started to take care of that dog, and come to find out, Hank was the dog that had bit Ted. And so Ted starts to take care of Hank and takes him on walks and plays fetch with him, all that fun stuff, he says. And then all of a sudden, about a year later, Mr. Grady's health turns bad, and his son comes, and they have to kind of remove him from the house and get him into an assisted care facility. And they asked Ted, would you like to keep Hank? And he said, and Ted said, absolutely. So he takes Hank home and cares for him and has him for about another year, and then Hank gets sick, and they have to put Hank down. At the end of this story, this is what Ted says. He says, it's funny to think about the things in your life that can make you cry just knowing they existed can then become the same thing that make you cry knowing that they're now gone. See, I think that's brilliant. I think that statement sums up the complexity of our past. that we all have these experiences that make our past a very confusing land to navigate. That when we look at our past is inevitably filled with things like loss. It's inevitably filled with heartbreak and disappointment, but it's also filled with blessing and elation and joy and happiness. And sometimes it's the same moment that we're remembering that brings that range of emotions. And how we see the loss and how we see the disappointment and what we do with that will have tremendous impact on our present. And the present is what we have. The most truthful thing in your life right now is this moment. Because this is what you have. And so much of what we do with our past, those experiences affect what happens to us right in this moment. And the way I have it there on your talk notes is it says our past memories have a strange way of holding our present moments hostage. Our past memories have a strange way of holding our present moments hostage. Our past memories, our past experiences impact the way we interact with one another, the way we see one another. And so we have to ask this question, what do we do when we look back, not just at the good things, not just at the stuff that we could actually say, oh, that's wonderful, the stuff that we say, #blessed, and we wear the sweater, right? But the stuff that we go, I don't know what to do with that. How can we actually not allow that to hold us hostage in this moment? So I want to look at a passage of Scripture today, see if we can't find some wisdom from one of the stories in what we call the Old Testament or the Hebrew Bible. And if you're new to Bible study, I want to say this right now, this story might be a little confusing because there's a backstory to it. And just if I can just in 2 minutes try and tell you the backstory, the very first king of Israel was a guy named Saul. And according to the people who wrote history, and we should always remember that history is generally written from the side of the winners, okay? So from the side of the winners, this happens even in the Bible, Saul was a pretty terrible king. And in my opinion, it was probably a little exaggerated, but when you're trying to establish David as the king, you got to make Saul look really bad. And so Saul was a not-so-great king. And at the end of the day, Saul felt threatened by a guy named David, who he had brought in. If you've ever heard of the story of David and Goliath, this was the same David. And David was brought in to kind of soothe and be a part of Saul and Saul's army. He led his army, but then Saul became very jealous of David. And how many of y'all know jealousy will mess you up, right? And so Saul, his jealousy, right, starts to determine his present actions. And he basically deems David a traitor and believes that David is trying to take over. And so he basically spends most of his energy and effort and resources, the army, chasing down David and his men, trying to kill him to save his kingdom. And Saul had a couple of sons, but one son's name was Jonathan. And the text tells us that Jonathan and David had this very special relationship, that they loved one another deeply, cared for one another deeply. And at the final battle of Saul's life, as he was battling kind of the enemies of the Israelites, he thought that David was a part of them. He thought that David was fighting with them. Like the entire family is basically killed, Saul and all his sons, including Jonathan. Through a series of events, David is crowned king and becomes king. And to this day, David is still thought of as one of the best kings in Israelite history, even though he had an affair with a woman and murdered her husband, right? David's a complicated guy. And so let's not over-romanticize what kings and kingdoms were like in antiquity, because it was a lot like Game of Thrones, all right? Same kind of principle there. If you want to know what the Old Testament kings and kingdoms and battles were, just read Game of Thrones, right? That's a lot of it was in there. And so David now becomes king, and the land is kind of at rest, and he's reflecting on things. And as he's reflecting on things, he asks this question. He says, is there still anyone left of the house of Saul to whom I may show kindness for Jonathan's sake? So he's wondering, is there anybody left? And it happened to be that there was a servant whose name was Ziba. And Ziba was a servant in the house of Saul, formerly King Saul, and he was summoned to David. That's a little frightening. If you're formerly the head of, chief of staff for the former king, and they want to know, you're being brought to the new king, that's not a good call. You aren't looking for that appointment. You're like, what do they want? And so he comes, and the king says to him, are you Ziba? And I wonder if in that moment he was like, maybe. I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. Let's find out why, right? But he says, I'm at your service, the best he can do. He's like, I'm at your service, right? And the king said, hey, is there anyone of the households of Saul remaining that I may show, and it's interesting what he says here, the kindness of God. Not just kindness, but he sees it as the kindness of God. And here's what I want to say. This is huge. David's kindness in that moment was gratitude. Like David's kindness was his gratitude for something that he had lost in his past. He thought of Jonathan. He thought of this covenant. He thought of this relationship that he had. And in that moment, he's filled with gratitude. And that gratitude gets demonstrated as kindness. He's wanting to show kindness. And this covenant, we can read about it if you're interested in 1 Samuel 20, verses 11 through 17, is this moment where David's pretty sure that Saul has turned against him. And Jonathan and David have this meeting. And it's a pivotal moment, and Jonathan swears that if Saul is out to get David, he will protect him. He will actually choose David over his father. And he says, and you'll protect my family if something happens to me. And it finishes in verse 17. It says, Jonathan made David swear again by his love for him, for he loved him as he loved his own life. I just don't think we should miss the loss that David felt in Jonathan's death, the loss of that relationship. And so that's what's driving all of this for David, is this immense emotion of gratitude, which is turning into actions of kindness. And so Ziba says to the king, there does remain one son of Jonathan, and he's crippled in his feet. We learned earlier in Samuel that his nurse had dropped him as she was fleeing one time on accident, and he'd been crippled since he was a child. And so the king said, well, where is he? And Ziba said, well, he's in the house of Machir, son of Ammiel at Lo-Debar. And so King David sent, and he brought him from there to the palace. And the son's name was Mephibosheth. That's a free one. Totally available. I don't think right now we have any babies in the nursery named Mephibosheth, so go for it. And Mephibosheth, son of Jonathan, appears, and he falls on his face. And he gives all the proper homage that you're supposed to. And David says, Mephibosheth. And again, I wonder if Mephibosheth was like, maybe? Because if now, think about it. Mephibosheth is actually in line for the kingdom as Saul's only living heir. And if the kingdom stays in the bloodline, he's actually should be sitting on the throne that David is. And so you got to imagine that Mephibosheth is already thinking, my life is as bad as it can be. I have nothing. I'm an outcast. I'm crippled. What am I supposed to do? Now I'm being brought to the king. He's probably going to kill me because I remain a threat to him. And he must have come full of fear in that moment. And I love it. David recognizes it, and he says, hey, don't be afraid, for I'm going to show you kindness for the sake of your father, Jonathan. In other words, I'm going to show you kindness in your present pain based upon my past experience. The joy and the loss, all of it, I'm now going to show you kindness because of that. And this is what he does. He says, I will restore to you all the land of your grandfather Saul, and you yourself shall eat at my table always. And we need to pause here and recognize that what David does here, this gratitude that he shows, was very, very costly. Very costly. Saul was the king, right? Saul didn't have a little 0.25 acre of land like y'all have in Colorado here that I live on now. In Maine, we had land, And I couldn't figure out, why do y'all build houses so close to each other? You see all the fields everywhere? Just spread out some. Give a little elbow room. Every time I cook out, I got to offer some to my neighbor. It's awkward. I'm like, here, take some. But that's not the case. He's got immense property. This was extremely costly. This dug into the pocketbook. And that's what he does. And so Jonathan, in this moment again, he bows low and he says, what is your servant? What is your servant that you should look upon a dead dog such as I? And this gives us a real glimpse into the hopeless state of Mephibosheth. As he looked at his life, as he thought what was ahead of him, as he thought about the whole line of Saul, it was just going to end with he and his son, as we find out he had a son. What were we to do? We were going to have to live really away, probably in hiding. No, he probably didn't want anybody to know where he was. Again, threat to the throne. But here's what's so powerful. David's gratitude for that loss and that experience and that joy in Jonathan brought hope to the future of someone else. Right? This very complex feeling that he had towards the loss of Jonathan. He says, I'm going to give that, and he brings hope. And this is what it says. It says, the king then summoned Saul's servant Ziba, brought him back, and said, everything that belongs to Saul and to all his house, I'm giving it to your master's grandson. So I'm giving it to Mephibosheth, and you all now have jobs. You all, and this is a big deal, right? I mean, we think, we have to just remember, like, this now means all of Ziba's household is provided for. And I'm giving it to you and your sons, and you'll work the land, and you'll be provided for. You'll bring in the produce. But your master's grandson, not going to eat that food. He's going to eat at my table, it says. And that's what happened. Now Ziba had, listen to this, 15 sons and 20 servants. 15 sons and 20 servants. Don't miss this. David is doing something really risky here. That's the start of a small army. Right? I mean, he's empowering a potential coup. He's empowering people who might have been his political enemies. Like, this is risky, and he has to trust that his kindness will be received and that kindness will conquer any other, thoughts of wanting to kill or take over. And so Ziba says to the king, according to all that you have said, all that you've commanded, your servant, I'll do it. I'm in. So Mephibosheth ate at David's table like one of the king's sons. And listen to this. It says Mephibosheth had a young son at the time whose name was Micah. So remember the state of mind, the frame of mind that Mephibosheth was in. He's got one son, Micah. He calls himself a dead dog. But here's the thing. David's gratitude, it saved a legacy. If we go over to the chronicler in 1 Chronicles, which is another kind of, it's the latest literature that we have in the Hebrew Bible. And it kind of tells the stories of the kings and their families. In 1 Chronicles 8, verse 33 through 40, we get a picture of the lineage of Saul. Now, I'm not going to read all these names because that would not be fair to Sarah. But I just want you to catch something. I want you to catch where Micah's name is and what happens after Micah. So the lineage starts with Saul's father, Kish, and Kish's father, Ner. And it says that Ner became the father of Kish, and Kish of Saul, Saul of Jonathan, Malchishua, Abinadab, and Eshbaal. Now, all of those sons died. And it says the son of Jonathan was Mephibosheth. And Mephibosheth became the father of Micah, one son. That's it. This is where David intersects. This is where the kindness intersects the timeline. But then Micah has 4 sons. And one of those sons, it says, became the father of Jehoiada. And Jehoiada became the father of all these other people. And all these other people became the father. And all these other people became the father. And all these other. And then there were 6 sons. And these were their names. And then there was another brother. And they had all of these children. And the sons of Ulam were mighty warriors, archers, having many children and grandchildren, 150. And then there were the sons of, and then they just kept going on and on and on. And then it says all of these were Benjamites. An entire legacy of one of the 12 tribes of Israel continues on because David allowed that emotion of gratitude become an action of kindness. Gratitude for his past, kindness in his present. See, the truth is we never know the impact of our kindness. We just never know what's going to happen. And we have to be humble enough to say, I don't need to know. So when we think about showing gratitude for our past, here's the point. Don't miss this. This is it. Gratitude for God's presence in your past. So David felt gratitude for God's presence through Jonathan. That gratitude means showing kindness to someone in their present pain. So when we talk about gratitude for the past, the fruit of that, the real gratitude, is when it becomes kindness that intersects someone's pain point right now. As peacemakers, it is not enough to simply feel good about what happened in the past. It is not enough to say, I'm so grateful, and to write our little gratitude things up here. It's just not enough because it doesn't change anything. It doesn't bring God's peace into the world. It's a start. It's the catalyst, and it has to come out of us, out of our hearts, out of our minds, into our hands and into our feet. And like David, sometimes that kindness is costly and it's risky. But that's the gratitude for the past that the peacemaker shows right now. So in your everyday normal life, I want to encourage you to consider how you have experienced God's presence in your past. Just as Jonathan thought back to probably one of the most painful realities of his life, to that point, the loss of this relationship of Jonathan, whom he loved with his own life, who cared for him, who protected him. And in that loss, in that pain, he was able to see God's presence there. So is there a person who cared for you in your life? Is there a person who believed in you? And maybe that person is no longer anywhere that you could speak to them right now. Maybe that person isn't a part of your life. Maybe that person has died. Maybe that person loved you as best as they could, and you have so much gratitude in your heart for that. Well, take that gratitude and demonstrate it. Demonstrate that gratitude by showing divine kindness to someone, by looking for a need, and on behalf of the need that was met in your life, you meet another need. Did you catch like this whole talk is really about this principle in normal language of paying it forward, right? Like that's the reality of what we're talking about, this deep spiritual principle of paying it forward. That's gratitude for the past. And it's divine kindness, right? Divine kindness, like what David showed, he called it the kindness of God because it was risky, it was costly, and it was hopeful. And that is the kindness of Jesus, by the way, if I can just insert the cross. The very gift of Jesus, the birth that we will celebrate in 4 weeks. Advent is next week. It kicks off, and as we look forward to the coming again of Jesus in a manger, and that gift that was risky, costly, and hopeful, and expected nothing in return. That's the call. That's the model. That's the example. And I think like David, we could learn something that we could invite someone to our tables. Invite someone to the table. Share with someone the gratitude that you have. Share with someone what's happened in your life, what God has done through others. Invite someone to your coffee table. Invite someone to your kitchen table. Invite someone to this communion table. Invite someone to Christmas Eve. Share that experience. Share what God has done in you, through you, and then pour into someone else. And to help us see how this can be lived out in our everyday normal lives, we're going to talk with Sandy G. and Greco Brown for just a moment, one of our new council members. Do me a favor and welcome Sandy. Sandy, welcome. Thank you for being here with us. It's so good to have you, and you're one of our new council members serving one of the most vital servant leadership roles in our church, keeping us all moving forward. So tell us a little bit about what you do outside of this building, like in your everyday normal life.
Thanks, Ryan, and thanks everyone for asking me to be here. So I'm a healthcare consultant, so basically that means I travel around now that we can travel again, but I support hospitals and health systems and try to educate them to make sure that they're also billing correctly, that they can get paid for what they're doing, but also not go to jail. So that's the thing. We joked about the other day that we should have 2 fees, and my friend Kim says this all the time. You know, her husband has said the fee to call when you're in trouble and the fee when, before you're in trouble. So,
right, so the
yes.
before jail fee and
exactly.
the after highly likely jail fee.
Yes.
Yeah, there you go. I like that. And you're engaged in some areas around here, involvement. What do you do around here?
Oh, nothing.
Nothing.
Nothing, no. So I do the giving tree. I love it. I love to just give back. Project One, when we did Project One, love to do that. And just anywhere that we can. And we love to engage my husband and with our grandkids too, and then our children too. It's great to get our kids involved as well.
Awesome. Now, talk to us about this idea of gratitude for the past being demonstrated in the present. Like, how's this making its way into your life?
Well, I, had a challenging childhood and such, so it's not like I came from this perfect life, and, I had to work my way up and put myself through school as an adult and things like that, so it hasn't always been easy. But probably one of the most impactful things was last year when my mom got sick with COVID, and we really thought, I know my sister had COVID at the same time. She was in Las Vegas. They didn't give it to each other, but that we really thought my mom, like, okay, she's got this. Like, she's going to come home. We had a plan. We had it all mapped out. And we kept praying, and I know a lot of you, my friends and so forth, were so gracious and prayed so much. And on Thanksgiving last year, I get the call at 1 o'clock in the morning that she's been put on the ventilator, and still I was like, okay, she's got an 80% chance of making it. And so we really were optimistic. We were still praying. I know all of you were praying. You all were so gracious, and I'm so thankful for friends and family. I could not have gotten through it. I know our family couldn't have gotten through it last year, and unfortunately, 9 days before Christmas, we had to make the horrible decision that my mom would pass away. And so the holidays for us are a little bit more challenging than they were in the past. So it's something, though, that we want to try to, I loved the message today. It was perfect that I came in and was asked to speak. This was all God's perfect timing, right? So because my mom was so giving. She was just so giving. She'd be the first one to give food, give whatever. That was her love language. If you knew my mom, she loved to cook and loved to bake, and that was just her thing. And she loved to shower it upon people. She also loved to help others. And so that's the way we carry on her legacy, and we just try to take our grief and be able to bless others.
And so you have like this idea of serving others, this idea of food, like you see those opportunities. Can you think of an opportunity, a time where you were like, since this tragedy happened, where it's been like, we're going to do this, and this is what mom would want us to do?
Yes, actually, my sister and I, we just saw something on Facebook one day about this young gal who needed a microwave or something. And I think we had posted some of my mom's stuff that we were trying to clean out her apartment, and we were blessing our family, but then blessing anybody we could. And we had already given ours away, and yet we had some money, so we went and bought it for this small family, and we just took it to her and said, our mom would have loved to have been able to do this for you. Yeah. So that's really what it's all about this time of year.
That's awesome. And as you get the last word here, all right? So how would you encourage people to live this, like, in their, like, what could they look for? How could they position themselves? Like you said, you saw on Facebook, like, what advice would you give to everybody about allowing the gratitude for the past to work into the present?
Use your experience. That's one thing, this emotional intelligence that we now have that I wish I didn't have, but we do. We can now bless others, people who have lost family members. We can love on them. You can just connect with them. I have made some connections here. Linda, Patty, just so many, Wendy, just so many people who have lost as well. And you can connect with them, but also being able to be an encouragement that life does go on, and there's still something, and we can just continue to bless each other. And that's really, whether it's like you were saying, your time, talent, or your treasure. If you don't have the finances, that's okay. Just come and volunteer, and I've got space for you to help. I'm putting a plug in for the giving tree.
There you go. So what I'm hearing you say is sometimes those difficulties in our past that, obviously the memories of like in your scenario, Mom, come with like these beautiful feelings, like that quote from Ted, and then also it brings that feeling of deep sense of loss and grief. But you've actually found people who you can actually relate to and leverage that feeling to kind of bring hope into, and they bring hope into your life as well. So no matter what those experiences might be, what I hear you saying is allow them to be, in a sense, redeemed into action for other people as well.
Absolutely, and to just reach out, even if you think it's nothing. I had someone reach out to me this week who said, you have given me purpose and you have shown me that there is hope. And I'm just doing, I just feel like I'm just doing what God is calling me to do. And I'm listening to those little voices that he might be nudging me and saying, hey, invite that person to coffee, or talk to this person, or just reach out. That's all it takes sometimes.
I love it. I love it. Give Sandy a great big hand. Thank you so much, Sandy. It's so good. So good. So in just a moment, we're going to receive communion together. And one of the things I like to ask as we kind of wrap up our talks is, how does this make me a better person? How does this make the world a better place? And the church way of saying that is, how does this glorify God? How does this bring about like heaven on earth? And in this scenario, it's so powerful because we actually can become the tangible presence of God in someone's life. Like when Sandy talks about her experiences and the emotions and the pain, and then entering into someone else's life in their same scenario, the same pain, she becomes that. You and I can become the very presence of God in people's hearts and lives. Certainly David was the kindness of God to Mephibosheth. Certainly David was that like visible expression of God. And I will say this too. I think that gratitude it holds healing properties. I think that gratitude holds healing properties. I think that there's something about gratitude that just heals us. In 1 Thessalonians, Paul goes through these arguments about being thankful for different things and in different circumstances because it kind of flips a switch in us. And I don't think that gratitude heals everything and makes everything all better and goes away, but I think it does bring comfort. And there's that property that can just kind of take away some bite, can refocus us. It can bring comfort in our distress over past experiences and our anxiety even in the future. So Ted Lasso is given the interview, and he gives this quote. He says, it's funny to think about the things in your life that can make you cry just knowing they existed, and then can become the same thing that make you cry knowing that they're now gone. And then he goes on to say this. I think those things come into our lives to help us get from one place to a better place. I love that. I think if we can learn to express kindness in our gratitude, those things in our lives that can bring us such joy, knowing that they existed, but then also such sorrow, knowing that they're gone, we can look and say, they helped us get from one place to a better one. So I'm going to invite our room hosts to come forward, and they're going to be in a few spots around the room to give our communion elements, the bread and the cup. And as you look for a space, just recognize it might be behind you. It might be the closest one, or just look, there might be one where there isn't a line. As you receive communion today, this is just a reminder very quickly that everybody's welcome to receive communion. You don't have to go to this church. You don't have to have any theological background. You don't have to have prayed any prayer or said any class. This is a moment where we demonstrate what is true of all of us, that we are loved by God, that the gift of Jesus, that what Jesus was showing us, that God so loved the world, that we're all included in this. And the bread and the cup are these reminders that our source of our strength is in Christ. Our source of nourishment for our spiritual life is God. And I think this is another powerful symbol that here's the thing, what Jesus wants us to know is that God is as available as bread and juice. There's not a 10-week course. You don't have to be a part of the right religion. You don't have to say the right prayer. That God is present if we just desire, even in bread and juice. So I hope that you hear God inviting you today. I hope that you hear God inviting you to say, you know what? I should think about how I've experienced God's presence in my past. I should figure out how to honor that past by investing in someone's future and demonstrating that. And I hope we all sense God inviting us to continue to make Crossroads a place of hope, to advance this mission and vision of peacemakers, this space of inclusion and fun and generosity and wisdom in healthy ways in 2022 through our adventure is worth it. So go ahead and stand on up. If you'll grab the bread and the juice and just hold it until when we're all done, and then we'll drink and eat together. If you look around and someone who might have difficulty getting to where the bread and the juice is, would you grab that for them and just bring and serve them? It'd be great. And then I'll be back and we'll eat the bread, drink the juice, have our blessing for the week, and get you out of here.